Some, even very influential and seemingly clever people, advise Ukrainians to give up their territories to Russia for the sake of peace. This is a very bad advice that will lead to wars, conflicts, and future destruction of democracy globally. But what is worse, Putin himself says he does not want the territory. He wants the ideology, he wants the future of the planet. In one of his recent addresses, when asked what territories he wants in Ukraine, he says, "It's not about territories, it's about the well choice." As a researcher, as a teacher at the university, perhaps I should give a definition of what Russkiy Mir is, though I don't want, and it's really difficult to catch this quasi-ideology into a normal definition. But we may say this is a quasi-ideology of modern Russia to expand and influence states abroad and also the countries that Russia formerly occupied and still considers its backyard. In the center of Russkiy Mir ideology, we have Russian Orthodox Church, Russian language, and falsified Russian history. It is impossible to identify the very dark moment when Russkiy Mir idea appeared, but it is very much associated with the beginning of 2000s and the beginning of Putin's political career. And first, he used the concept when talking about Russians abroad or other Russian-speaking people abroad, trying to unify them in strong Russian world Russkiy Mir diaspora. Progressing together with Putin's madness, the concept of Russkiy Mir became huge. Actually, it shapes modern Russia philosophy and traditionally continues the confrontation between the West and traditional Russian values to kill, to loot, and to falsify. A large part of this ideology is based on the language, the usage of Russian language. That's why so many people oppose Russification in the countries that once were occupied by Soviet Union. Putin said that those who speak Russian and think in Russian belong to Russkiy Mir. And his press secretary Peskov repeated in 2021 that many people speak Russian in Ukraine, thus they belong to Russkiy Mir. This is very wrong. Well, first of all, Ukraine was Russified for decades. Many people were killed because they spoke Ukrainian. Russian was the official language, and it was really difficult to keep Ukrainian language and Ukrainian traditions, but we managed. So a huge part of Ukrainian society was artificially Russified and now returned back to their cultural identity. But what is even more absurd is the very approach. So, according to Putin's logic, everyone who speaks English is actually English. I know many of you think that collapse of Russia will mean the end of the world, nuclear war. Look at the collapse of Soviet Union. Nothing happened, only some happy countries appeared. The same may happen after the collapse of Russia. New cultures, new languages, actually old cultures and old languages will become visible, because at this moment Russian educational system, Russian cultural policy, and even Russian national security strategy is focused only on the support and spread of Russian language, not giving these nationalities and indigenous peoples practice their languages. The return of Belarus language to Belarus, Ukrainian to Ukraine, or Kazakh to Kazakhstan, Russia sees as a national threat and actually attacks. Because one of the reasons why in 2014 Russia invaded Ukraine was the so-called protection of Russian-speaking people. We see how they protect them now in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, and in other places of mass murders of Ukrainians by Russians. In 2014, the concept of Russkiy Mir became extremely important to explain and support Russian invasion into Ukraine. Actually, they were preparing for a really long period of time. More than 20 cultural educational centers dedicated to Russkiy Mir doctrine were functioning in southern and eastern parts of Ukraine. And they spread the idea of Novorossiya. This is the idea that faded away, but Russia planned to construct out of these quasi-republics a new territory under the title Novorossiya, something similar to New Russia. So actually they were using cultural centers as the centers for separatists, for the support of Russkiy Mir idea, and invasion of Ukraine. And here is the moment when I want to ask you to be very attentive, especially if you come from countries that were previously occupied either by Russian Empire or by Soviet Union. It is very likely that in your countries there are Russian cultural centers that operate as soft power, but in reality are centers for spy, for intoxication, and the centers that try to cause instability and Russify the region. It is actually a very cunning idea. Who will oppose culture? Who will oppose language practice? But Russians don't give you access to language or culture. They give you access to the toxic ideology of Russkiy Mir that confronts itself to all the democratic values. Another sphere that they actively use, that is Russian Orthodox Church. Once again, who will say something negative against church? At least in Ukraine it's not very common. People are polite, people rarely speak bad about priests, and Russian Orthodox priests glorify Putin, glorify Stalin, which is another absurdity of Russkiy Mir. You can see Tsar Nicholas killed by communists, Stalin, Lenin, and Putin on icons during Russkiy Mir parades. Today, Russian Orthodox Church, together with the KGB agent Kirill, spread the ideas of toxic Nazi ideology of Russkiy Mir and actually bless the missiles that are sent to kill Ukrainians. Russian Orthodox Church as an institution, or better say as a criminal ideological organization, does not try to stop Putin, does not try to find peace or forgiveness. It inspires killing of Ukrainians. Lots of Russian Orthodox priests in Ukraine were responsible for the support and cooperation with occupants, were giving them lists of Ukrainian patriotic people for execution, and even prepare special manuals that explain Russian war crimes in Ukraine as a necessary punishment from God. So let's sum up. Russkiy Mir is a quasi-ideology that is based on the idea that Russia is a unique country in the world, a unique culture in the world, the greatest of great and responsible for the future of this world. They see all the other cultures, especially those who have different vision of future, as dangerous and describe West as rotting and decaying, and focus on this falsified Russian history where the center of everything is in Moscow. The center of all the evil is now in Moscow. If a person speaks Russian, according to Putin, he or she or they belong to Russkiy Mir. Well, we clearly understand it's not true. Russian culture is described as superior, and all the countries that were once occupied by it are seen as former colonies that lose if they lose their Russian heritage. And church is used as an instrument of fear and hatred, something that greatly contradicts the idea of Christianity. I hope one day we will read about Russkiy Mir only in ideological history books that will illustrate us what true Nazi fascist ideology is and how to avoid them, how to prevent them actively. Because this is a very toxic doctrine that shakes the world. We see how wrong it is. Russia spreads its propaganda, fewer and fewer people believe it, but we have to unite. So please subscribe if you're new to the channel. And share these videos to help us fight this informational war. And by stealing a history, you cannot steal the qualities a nation possesses. And Ukraine will win. Slava Ukraini!